Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. We are still in lesson 6. Believe it or not, it is a long lesson, and it does take us some time to go through this lesson. There's lots of different pieces mixed in this lesson. So far, what we've done is we've gone through and understood what a proportion is and understood that it is equivalent ratios. We have also, in this lesson so far, solved proportions where we had a missing value. You've practiced that the last 2 days as well to find that missing value and also show that they were equivalent in a proportion. Now, what we're going to do is some story problems with proportions where you will need to understand how to set them up correctly in those ratios and then solve. So the first problem I'm going to do with you is example 1, and this is on page 56. So again, I know this is an example that's already done for you in the book, but at the same time, it's good to go through it. It's a good example to understand. So I'm going to rework it out on the left side here of the margin. So let's start reading number 1. It says, after 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time it will take at this rate for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to circle the information I see and know, and I'm going to underline what we're solving for so we can set a proportion up. So right at the beginning here, where it says, after 2 hours, the temperature had risen 7 degrees Fahrenheit. This right here, I'm going to circle. I'm going to identify this as a piece of data that I need to put in that proportion. Also, if I go to the very end here, it says it will take the amount of time it will take at this rate for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit right here. So I need this. Well, what am I solving for? Write and solve a proportion to find the amount of time. The amount of time it will take. So, like I said, we're going to set a proportion up. So I'm going to come over here to the left side of the work, the notes section here. And I'm actually already going to start by putting in my 2 equivalent ratios, my fraction lines. I know that my problem is going to set up and look like this. Now, what I've circled, we are going to plug into the proportion. With story problems, it's very important to make sure that when you set these up, the labels always match. So I'm going to write that up here. Labels always match. And so what I mean by that is, in your numerator, you have to have the same labels from the story. And in your denominator, you have to have the same labels from the story. So I'm going to take this first piece here that we circled. After 2 hours, the air temperature had risen 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to set it up in this first fraction. 7 degrees Fahrenheit after 2 hours. Now, my labels. In my numerator here, this is going to be my temperature. So I'm just going to put that off to the side. That's going to be my temp in degrees. In the denominator, that's going to be my time or my amount of hours. So now when I go to fill in the rest of my proportion, I see at the end here, we want to know at what amount of time it's going to take for the temperature to rise an additional 13 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to match that in the numerator where my degrees, my temperature is already at. So everything in my numerator is degrees. We're trying to find the amount of time. That's what I underlined here. This is what we don't know. This is the unknown. And so I need a variable down here in the denominator to represent the amount of time. So I'm going to have you use T for time, and that time happens to be in hours. So we're going to put a T right there in the denominator. I know it looks like a plus sign, but it is a T to represent time. Okay, so now we have our proportion, and based on what we've learned with solving proportions, to find that missing value, we can do a couple of things. First off, we can look to see if we're getting larger or smaller by a certain amount in the numerator, by a whole number that's really easy to see. Well, we're going from 7 to 13. It's going up by a decimal amount, but it's not very clear. So at that point, then what I would do is use your cross products, which we practiced yesterday as well. And so that means I'm going to cross multiply in both directions to help me solve for that missing time right there. So I'm using lots of colors. Let's use blue. So I'm going to cross multiply here. And this is going to be 7 times t. 7 times t, 7t. And in the other direction, I'll use green this time. Ugh, these colors don't really match, do they? It's all right. So I'm just trying to have you understand where I'm doing my cross multiplication at, and I'm breaking it apart. So 13 times 2, that's going to give me 26. And at that point, I have that one step. So my one-step equation I need to solve. And so now I'm going to divide by 7. Remember, the opposite of that multiplication is to divide to undo it and solve and get that variable by itself. We're going to divide by 7 on both sides to balance out. So here I've got t equals 26 divided by 7. Well, I know you can look over here at the work already shown and done for you and see the answer. But take your calculator and divide it out. So 26 divided by 7 gives you a really big decimal. We're going to round it to the nearest tenth. And so if you go one place past the decimal, that is 3.7. And remember, this is in hours. So we're trying to find the amount of time. We're solving for hours. 3.7 hours is how long it's going to take for the temperature to rise 13 degrees. Okay, so let's try one more together. We're going to go to page, we're going to do the independent practice. So scroll down. And we're going to go to number 4. So number 4 on the independent practice is on page 59. Page 59. Okay, so number 4 here. We're going to set a proportion up. So I'm going to use this workspace here. I'm going to draw my fraction lines. And let's read the story. Everardo paid $1.12 for a dozen eggs at his local grocery store. And I'm going to circle that. $1.12 for a dozen eggs. We need that for our proportion. Determine the cost for 3 eggs. You have 3 eggs. I'm going to circle that information, and I'm going to underline what you're solving for. Determine the cost. So you want to know how much it is for 3 eggs. So let's take the first part of that story, and we're going to put that in this very first fraction here. So we're going to say $1.12. And then that's for a dozen eggs. Now, I'm not going to put a dozen eggs. I'm not going to spell it out. How many eggs are in a dozen? 12, right, is what you should be saying. So we're going to write underneath in the denominator 12 eggs. Okay, so think about what I'm doing in the numerator and denominator for labels right now. In the numerator here, this is cost or money. That looks really bad. Let's try that again. Okay. $, money. There we go. Denominator. This here, this label that you're going to use in your denominator is eggs. So we have to stay consistent with that. We have to make sure our labels match, like I mentioned. So remember, it says here, determine the cost. We don't know the cost for the eggs. So since we're looking for cost, I'm going to have C represent the cost. And so I have 3 eggs. So I'm going to make sure I match up eggs in my denominator. I have 3. I don't know how much it is for 3. I don't know the C. I don't know this cost right here. Okay. So we have a decimal in the problem. And so when you have a decimal in the problem, again, it's harder to see maybe what it's increasing or decreasing by in the numerator or denominator. So your best option here is to use cross products. So here we go. We're going to multiply 12 times C. And we're going to get 12C. Okay, let's go the other direction. We're going to multiply $1.12 by 3 eggs. All right, so let's calculate that. $1.12 times 3. So you always should be doing this with me. You should always be calculating this with me. You should see here $3.36, 3.36. Okay, well, we're going to solve this one-step equation, right? We're going to take and divide by 12. We need to get C all by itself. We're going to divide by 12 so that we get 1C, or C equals. And on the other side of the equal sign, we're going to balance and also divide by 12. Let's take that $3.36 and divide it by 12. And what you should see as a decimal, now we're talking money. So with your decimal, since we're talking money, this is change you're looking at. So it should be in the hundredths. You should see 28 cents. So the cost for 3 eggs is 28 cents. Okay, so I've shown 2 problems where you are setting the proportion up based on the story given to you. You're plugging into those equivalent ratios, that proportion, the information you have, the data that you have, and you're solving for what's missing. And you're making sure as you do this that your labels in the story match in the numerator and match in the denominator. So now it's your turn. You're going to turn to page 60. And on page 60, you're going to work on number 9. So you're going to start off by making sure you understand that this is going to be a proportion that you're setting up. And then read the story, and maybe like I did, circle the information in here that you know and that you have, and underline what you're solving for to help you put in the proportion to solve it. So pause the video, try number 9, and then unpause to check your answer. Okay, let's see how you did. So on number 9, we should see here that 360 visitors rode the roller coaster in 3 hours. That is your first fraction. That is your first ratio right here. And notice I'm putting 360 visitors in the numerator and 3 hours, the time, in the denominator. So then it says, write and solve a proportion to find the number of visitors number of visitors you don't know. And then at this rate, who will ride the roller coaster in 7 hours? 7 hours, right? So we're going to match those labels. 7 hours goes in the denominator. Hours and hours are together. And so we're calling the number of visitors V. So you see me put a V in for that variable in that spot. That's what we're solving for. Visitors in the numerator, time and hours in the denominator. I'm going to cross multiply and I'm going to solve. And when I go through my steps of solving that proportion, I should see that there's going to be 840 visitors in 7 hours. Alrighty, so as far as the book goes today, this is the end of the book for lesson 6. You're going to practice some proportion stories next on an attached worksheet on the agenda. So you'll go back to the agenda, look at that next, and bring that up and work on those proportion stories.